Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good evening. You're welcome to our first session today. Uh, my name is Winnie Nekesa Akulo. I'll be facilitating with Elizabeth for this session today. This session is being live streamed to the LD4 YouTube channel and recorded. It will later on be saved on the YouTube for future viewing. We have a number of useful resources that will be displayed on our screen now. These resources include the conference website where you can access information about the conference, then the code of conduct, our Twitter handle, the Slack invitation. In case you need any technical support, you can have that the hashtag, as well as the collaborative projects that have been that are undergoing on. In case you have any question, please raise your hand during the session, and we encourage you, please to raise your hands or use the Zoom chat. This session, we are going to be focusing on two presentations, one entitled Librarians' Perspectives and Attitudes Towards Linked Data Applications in Nigerian and Indian University Libraries, and then also another presentation focusing on the open heritage data in Philippines museums. Today, we have one of our speakers, Paul Jason Perez. Paul is an assistant professor at the University of Philippines School of Library and Information Science Studies. His current research is on open heritage data in Philippines museums, which is part of his investigations into the use and management of metadata in cultural heritage institutions in the Philippines. Paul, you're most welcome. Looking forward to listening in to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Winnie, and thank you, Elizabeth, for having me here. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. It's 9 p.m. here in the Philippines, but it's perfect for me because I'm a night person. So let me start and share my screen. Okay. So the title of my presentation is Open Heritage Data in Philippine Museums, and this study was made possible with the help of my students, Joey Esqueda and Paul Hequinto, and also of some people that I'll be thanking later. First, I want to let me just move the interface here. There you go. Okay. So first, I want to answer this question: why this study? I want to again, I want to thank the LD4 conference for giving us this space to share our study. This study is inspired by my interest in linked open data as applied in libraries, archives, and museums. I also took a Wikidata course under Will Kent, which I believe is a common denominator for most people who are into LD4 or into linked data, and that furthered my interest in LODLAM. And so I am approaching this topic with the lens and focus on metadata management and how metadata can be made more accessible. And in lieu of my museology expertise, we consulted with professionals working in Philippine museums, and we're also planning to include them as part of the team in the future. So to start, to give some context about our country, so the Philippine bill that serves as the legal framework for cultural work in our country is the Republic Act 10066, or also known as the National Cultural Heritage Act of 2009. This is a landmark bill because it established and strengthened the role of cultural agencies in protecting and promoting the cultural heritage of Filipinos. One important provision in the Republic Act is the establishment of the PRECOP, or also known as the Philippine Registry of Cultural Property. So what you're seeing here on the screen is a screen recording of the website of the National Commission for the Culture and Arts, where the registry is uploaded and shared. And when I say registry, what it means is just really a spreadsheet. And in this example, it's a spreadsheet of the works of Philippine national artists that's being shown. So some of the metadata that you can see here includes title, the type of work, physical dimension, date of creation, the creator. You can also see some images within the spreadsheet or some links within the spreadsheet. And since this is just a spreadsheet, further examination of data quality can reveal inconsistencies, especially in naming and values provided in some of the fields. Although this can serve as a starting point for someone who is looking for data about cultural properties or items in the Philippines, this is example does not represent open data, nor does it represent the different cultural items that are being housed in various museums across the country. And so I want to share this phrase from one of the seminal books in semantic web for the working ontologist, which is data on the web versus a web of data. That spreadsheet is an example. Uploading a spreadsheet on a website is a clear example of a data on the web, but not a part of the web of data. That example shown earlier does not embody openness and accessibility. So what we want to find out are the open data of Philippine museums. And to help us understand the concept of openness, we use the framework provided by Henriette Rued Cunliffe, which discussed the different types of levels or the different types or levels of openness within heritage institutions. So, for example, the physical openness refers to proximity with the cultural institution, along with the privileges of being able to afford access to these spaces. Another type of uh, another type of openness is online openness, which is demonstrated by the ability of users being able to browse, filter, search the collections through the web or through the internet. But the physical and the online openness of this institution doesn't really inspire creativity, according to Rued Conliffe, because in order for us to be creative, we have to have the functionalities to use and reuse these cultural items, these cultural materials, and the only way to do that is by having data access. And this is where her framework of open heritage data comes in. So Rued Cunliffe presents these five specific and very practical questions that can guide institutions to measure the degree or qualify the degree of openness of their institution. So these questions are based on the principles of open knowledge, linked open data, and open GLAM. Specifically, these questions are the following: is the material published online with metadata so that it can be searched and filtered? Is the material published with an open license or in the public domain? And is that clearly communicated along with the material? Does the institution actively encourage reuse of the material? So this has to be strategic. It can range from having a way to provide users to cite your materials, but also it can be some programs that are instituted by the museum, such as hackathons or other activities that involve the user digging in to their collection. And then number four, is the material available in an open, machine readable format that anyone can export or download? And then finally, is the material available through a well described web service or API so that not only humans can extract or download these data, but also other systems or other machines? These questions are not meant to be similar to the 5-star rating, the 5-star linked open data rating by Tim Berners-Lee, because as you can see, some of these questions are not built on top of each other. Like, for example, your data can be exportable, but it doesn't have to be published in open license. But nevertheless, these 5 questions are very practical and can serve as a guide to measure the degree of openness, of data openness within cultural institutions. Which leads me to the main question of our research. What is the state of openness of Philippine museums? More importantly, what is their state of openness now? Given that we are still in the middle of a pandemic, and the pandemic has made visible the epistemological questions about openness of these institutions. But the first problem that we encountered really is how to determine how many museums are there in the Philippines, how to determine the number of museums in the Philippines. Currently, the websites of the Philippine National Commission for Culture and the Arts and the National Museum do not state how many museums there are in our country. We found several Freedom of Information requests that are looking for the same data, but none of them were answered satisfactorily. And so we turned to Wikidata, Sparkle, and we got an initial list of around 80 museums. Uh, Eventually, we expanded this to around 85. But when we consulted with a museum professional, the number of museums in the Philippines can be more than 600. But for this study, the sample of the number of museums that we will be looking at is 85. And so let's start looking at the degree of openness of these institutions, starting with the physical level. We can consider that there is no physical access to Philippine museums as of the moment. So a recent guideline from our government released on uh, the first week of June, June 10th or June 11th, states that libraries, museums, and archives can operate if they only allow a maximum number of people at the same time. That number should not be more than 20% of their stated maximum capacity. So before that, these institutions are completely closed to the general public since the start of the pandemic. Also, given that there are cases of the COVID Delta variant being reported here in Manila recently, there is a huge possibility that these institutions will be closed again. So, in short, there is no physical openness that can be considered during this time of the pandemic. And because of that, we move our attention to online openness. Based on our survey, only 22 out of the 85 or 25.8% of the sample museums have a dedicated website. That means others have a static page dedicated for them in their parent institution's website. For example, a university museum page within a university website page. Of the 22 that have their own dedicated website, there are few, 4 institutions uh, who have virtual tours. Others are using blogs as their main sites, while others doesn't have anything, but they're only using social media platforms such as Facebook or Instagram. But what I want to point out is that in terms of online openness, there's only one institution that were able to demonstrate access to their collection, which I'll be showing later. So this is a screen recording of the website of the National Museum of the Philippines. It shows that the collections are only described using static pages. And as you go to the search for collections, you will see that it's not developed, and the website was last updated in 2014. There is a link for the 360 I guess, a virtual tour. But if you click on it, you will see that it requires Adobe Flash Player, which is no longer supported by browsers due to security concerns. So that is the website of the National Museum. There are museums here in the Philippines that facilitate virtual tours. So, for example, the Met Museum allows users to have this virtual experience and interact with the items. And from here, you can see that a brief metadata description and some information about the materials being shown. Virtual tours like these are usually developed by third party, and these third party companies are usually specializing in web development. While there are also some institutions that use free tier services, such as the ones offered by artsteps.com, but those services are very limited. So this is the only institution from our sample that was able to provide online access. This is from the Ateneo Art Gallery. Ateneo is one of the leading private higher education institution here in the Philippines. And as you can see from the website, it has capabilities for filtering, searching, and providing metadata along with the actual material. So I guess it is no surprise that if we go deeper to the data level, almost all institutions did not meet any of the open heritage data qualities. In fact, only one institution, which is the Ateneo Art Gallery, is considered a yes in the first question of having the metadata online. And the rest of the 85 museums doesn't meet the qualities of open heritage data, which I want to confess that the title of this presentation may seem misleading, but I want to let everyone know that our intention really is to investigate and look for open heritage data here in the Philippines. So with this result, we have to pivot our study and find out why this is the case. We want to understand in particular, the cataloging practices of these institutions, how the pandemic affected their operations, and also to hear their thoughts and opinions about open heritage data. We were able to interview 11 museums across different types of collections, and some of them are government funded while others are privately funded or run by volunteers. So the first question, when we asked them to describe how they catalog their cultural materials, only 3 of the 11 institutions were able to mention a specific metadata framework. So for example, a natural history museum that we interviewed mentioned the use of Darwin Core, which is understandable because that is specific for their collection. But what is common across these different institutions is that when we ask them to talk about how they describe and catalog their materials, a lot of them are really talking about spreadsheets and inventories. So majority of the institutions talk about how they accession and inventory their materials when we ask about cataloging practices. So needless to say, these catalogs or inventories are for their institutional use, and these are not, of course, available to the public. And the nature of spreadsheets, they're usually not designed to be catalogs. We also asked the effects of the pandemic to their operation because we assume that this can be a catalyst for them to move their operations online, as many industries have. But mostly when asked about their operations, a lot of them mentioned about working on their backlogs or revisiting and reevaluating their collections. Excuse me. Some institutions became active on Facebook, One in particular was able to double their number of followers since the start of the pandemic. And finally, there is one institution that did validate our assumption. This particular institution already has plans way before the pandemic to digitize their collection. And they did mention that because of the pandemic, there is now strong pressure for them to really uh, continue the digitization and open their collections online. So overall, we can say that there is definitely a desire to bring and open their collections online, but institutions have mentioned lack of financial support, technical expertise, and even lack of staff as some of the primary reasons preventing them to do so. This also explains why being close, some of them prioritize working on their backlogs. And I understand that a lot of cultural institutions really develop a lot of backlogs due to uh, the lack of staff. Because during normal operations, these staffs are dedicated to their normal operations. There are also concerns about copyright and whether making their collections online will affect their revenues from sales of digital assets. Now, this is interesting because um, this is actually a myth, and this myth has been debunked many times. And as mentioned by Ruud Cunliffe, opening these collections will lead to awareness and promotion, which will lead to more relevance and funding. And finally, a common theme that our interviewees mentioned is the lack of IT, information technology skills, or IT personnel. And with this, I quote, open heritage data is not so much a technical issue, but rather about data access being the current frontier. So this means that this will require leadership and also awareness about the principles of open heritage data and linked open data. And so, what have we learned so far? Definitely, there needs to be more level of awareness about the concepts of linked open data, metadata frameworks, and metadata management here in the Philippines before we can even begin to talk about linked open data and open heritage data. Also, more importantly, the solutions that we need to provide to Philippine museums if they want to open their collections online or at the data level should recognize the practices and capabilities in our context, in our country. One example that we have done and have shown to our interviewees to which they express significant interest is the use of open source tools. For example, the collection builder. This is a system developed by the brilliant digital initiatives librarians from the University of Idaho Library and was funded by the Institute of Museum and Library Services. So, for example, in our institution, we recently launched this digital exhibit to celebrate our 60th year. Based on what you're seeing on the screen, the user has a capability to browse the collection, and each item is accompanied with metadata based on a standard, which is Dublin Core. And also, there is a right statement that if it's Creative Commons, then it facilitates open license. And also, there is a mechanism for people to cite these items so that they can reuse it. Another example is the Rizal Hall at 100. This is another exhibit that we developed. And from here, you can see that the metadata is available for download in various open and machine readable format. You can see that users can also browse the data and they can download it in CSV or Excel or JSON or other, as I mentioned, machine readable open format. So in summary, this study used the open heritage data and the openness in heritage framework discussed by Henriette Ruid Conliffe to paint a picture of the current openness in Philippine museums, especially during this time of the pandemic. A candidate system that museums can use should be able to recognize the practices and the capabilities of our institutions. And for example, if they'll be using Collection Builder, it will be able to address four out of the five criteria raised by Henriette uh, Ruid Conliffe. And also, since a lot of the institutions doesn't have their own websites, the collection builder can be hosted via GitHub. So this will allow institutions to have that space online. But definitely, there is still a need to raise awareness on open heritage data. And again, I want to thank the following people: Benedict Salazar Olgado for helping us with the funding and through consultations, and Miss Thea Garing, she's the museum professional whom we consulted. And to all the museums and cultural workers who are affected by the pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paul, for that excellent presentation. It's so good to know that even during this pandemic, people are able to access the heritage data, and of course, it is something that we're able to learn from. Personally, as someone from Uganda, it's something that we can learn from and see how we can be able to open up this data despite this pandemic, because as we are all aware that most of our users are not able to physically access some of our resources. So thank you so much for this excellent presentation. I appreciate. Um,
Thank you.
I think, thank you. Unfortunately, we are not able to have our second presenter, Michael. He won't be able to join us today, but we hope to have his presentation and then we upload it on our YouTube channel alongside Paul's presentation. In case you have any question, please raise your hand or type in the chat so that Paul is able to respond to your concerns. Thank you very much.
I actually would like to ask a question. I can start. I was really, really interested. I think this study is important, particularly because it points out some of the mindset barriers, I might say. You know, you pointed, I loved reading all those quotes that you pulled out from the various interviews of, you know, we're just making it the metadata for ourselves. Why would anybody else need it? Or, you know, we don't have time to worry about exposing it to others. We are working on just having it for ourselves. How do you think that we can overcome some of those? Because I think that's happening not only in under-resourced institutions, but also those of us in heavily resourced institutions. We are also having to fight this battle. Do you have any thoughts on how we can address those sorts of barriers?
That is actually a difficult question. And from our experience working with our projects on the examples that I've shown earlier, we since a lot of these institutions that we interviewed are already using spreadsheets, they're using Excel. There has to be a conversation about the mindset, as you mentioned, because they think that there has to be some IT skills. You need to know how to use a database, and you need to know how to code or to program. But there are tools and there are also data literacies that needs to be addressed first. And once you address those issues, I believe that the tools can come later. Like what we experienced with our project, the collection builder system only relies on a CSV, which is similar to an Excel. So once you have your metadata arranged in a spreadsheet, you can use that to develop that kind of system. So there has to be a conversation about data literacy, and also the mindset that this is not an IT issue, but rather a data issue.
Thank you for that question and the response. Do you have more questions, please? In case you have a question, please raise your hand or submit it in the chat for Paul to respond. It seems we don't have questions. Are there any questions, please, before we close for the next session? Okay, I think we don't have any questions. Paul, once again, we would like to thank you for sparing time to present and also share with us your experiences, what you guys are doing regards open data. We appreciate that. To all our participants, thank you so much. We hope that you'll be able to join us in the subsequent sessions. Please check out our Slack channel. We hope to meet again. Enjoy the conference and enjoy your day, evening, and morning. Cheers.